I don't know if some of the younger ones know this word. I'm sure most of you have now. I didn't learn this word until I think I was a senior in high school. But it's the word oxymoron. And I'm sure now you guys have kind of heard it, and I know I've spoken on it before. But basically what an oxymoron is like when you take two words or two ideas or two phrases and put them together, and they literally mean distinctly different kinds of things. But what's interesting is not only are there words and phrases that we use on a regular basis in this way, but it seems that Jesus often does this in his teaching, that the Bible is full of oxymorons, things that seemingly don't fit together. Okay? There's a lot of that. Some of the things that Jesus says is, in order to live, you must what? Some of you guys know. You must die. And, we can go a whole sermon and what does that mean? Why is Jesus saying that? And number one, because it makes you think, and it's easy to remember. Things like that, oxymorons, are easy to remember because they don't seem like they ought to fit, but somehow they do, right? And Jesus says things like, in order to be the leader, to really be the greatest in the kingdom of God, you need to be the least. You need to be the servant. He says things of that nature. He says things like, love not just your family and your friends, but love who? Your enemies. Wait a minute. Aren't we supposed to kill our enemies? Aren't we supposed to, defeat our enemies? What do you mean love our enemies? It doesn't make any sense, right? And so there's things and there's concepts and there's ideas that seem to have this kind of weird kind of juxtaposition, things that don't fit together. And what I want to tell you is that there is a principle here that I want you to kind of have an underlying truth about in terms of our lives. In our life, things are not always black and white. There's what we call in philosophy and theology, maybe some of you will learn this, and when you get to college, maybe you've already learned it in high school, but it's called dynamic tension. There's these 2 points that seem like they're irreconcilable, but somehow they're connected. And it's in the balance of, it's in the act of having these dynamic tension that actually a lot of growth happens. Anybody that excels or grows in anything, there's a point where it seems like everything needs to be broken down in order for you to get to the next level. It happens in athletics. We're having the Olympics coming soon, right? It's when everything seems to be standing still. If any of you have achieved anything, then a breakthrough comes when everything seems to be like at the lowest point and you go to another level. And there's this dynamic tension in order for us to move forward in anything. Sometimes in relationships, you have to go through an incredibly difficult spot or have a blowout argument before that relationship goes to a deeper place and a more intimate place. And so if you read this passage that I read to you, there's a lot of stuff in here. But one thing I want to do is set the context for you. And what is happening right here in John chapter 13 is Jesus knows that very shortly he's going to be abandoned by all his disciples. He's going to be taken captive in the Garden of Gethsemane as he's praying by the Jews. They're going to send their policemen, their soldiers to come and take him. And we all know from the story of Jesus Christ that he's going to be beaten unfairly. It's going to be, that brutality that nobody's going to stop. He's going to be beaten to almost to death. And then he's going to be unfairly judged. There's going to be false witnesses that bear false testimony against him, that lie and accuse him of things that he's never done. In complete innocence, he's going to be taken before the Roman government leader, Pontius Pilate, and he wants to declare him free, but all the Jewish crowd cheers and says, no, we want him to be crucified. And ultimately, that's what happens. He gets beaten. He gets unfairly judged, and ultimately he gets crucified on the cross. This is what's going to happen very shortly and over the course of the next 24 hours. And so Jesus, this is his last time with his disciples, the ones that he cares about the most in the world. And here's his last kind of message to them. And here's what's going on. In verse 21, it says, and here's the oxymoron in this passage. Jesus was troubled in his spirit. And so he says, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. But then in John 14, verse 1, after he teaches his disciples, after he talks with them, what does he say? He says, but you guys, don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. So there's this juxtaposition about being troubled in spirit, but not troubled in your heart. What is Jesus getting at? I want to make sure I help you understand what this passage means. So I'm going to give you my understanding of it up front and then try to explain it a little bit. But there is a truth that if you want to really have a life where you overcome, where you don't fall into depression, where you're not always discouraged, where you don't get knocked down by the difficulties and the trials of life, you have to understand this dynamic tension. You have to understand this juxtaposition that Jesus gives specifically for his followers, specifically for Christians, about how we can be troubled in our spirits and yet at peace in our hearts. How does that work? And when you look at this, and if you look at it carefully, I hope you'll come to the same conclusion, maybe not, but I hope that I can prove to you and show you from this passage that Jesus is troubled in his spirit, not about all that he's going to face, not about the torture that he's going to endure, not about the false judgment and testimony people are going to bear against him, not about even dying on the cross. He's not troubled in his spirit about those things. He's troubled in his spirit about people, specifically his disciples. He may be momentarily troubled in his heart about what he's going to endure, but ultimately he trusts his Father. He knows where he's come from. He knows where he's going. He knows the purpose of why he's dying on the cross. And so he says, I won't be troubled. I refuse to be troubled in my heart. But when he is troubled in his spirit, it is always, always, always through the Bible, through the New Testament, over the hardness of people's heart, over the brokenness in their lives, over the illnesses that they're suffering through, over the demonization that they're going through, over the bondage that they're in. He's always troubled and distressed and agonizing and anxious over people and their sufferings and their hardness of heart and their illnesses. But he's not troubled over his circumstances, his trials, his difficulties, because he knows whom he believes in. So what does this mean for us? If you're a Christian, the troubling of your spirit should always be, doesn't mean that this is always the case, not for me, not for anybody, but we should truly be troubled in our spirits for people when they make wrong choices, for people when they're struggling with their faith, for people when they're having a hard time really understanding who God is, when their heart is hardened against the right things, when they're making bad choices. We should be in anguish and turmoil in our spirit for them. And that usually will lead us to pray. That will usually lead us to go and talk with them and to comfort them and to encourage them and to try to help them. If you see here, when Jesus is troubled in his spirit, what John says is that he is troubled in his spirit, and then what he says is, truly, truly, I will save you, one of you will betray me. Is Jesus troubled in his spirit because he's going to be betrayed? No, he's troubled in his spirit because of the hardness of Judas's heart, who is going to be betraying him, who's been with him for 3 years, and yet he doesn't still see the love of God. He doesn't still see. He's still going to reject the grace and the salvation of God. He's going to reject the love of God. And Jesus is troubled by this. He's saying, Judas, I'm trying to give you every last chance. I want you to understand. And yet, Judas doesn't see and accept the love of Jesus. After 3 years, after all that he said, after all that he's done, after all that he's seen, his heart is hardened still. This is what troubles Jesus in the spirit. How then can we learn from Jesus? How then can we learn to be troubled in our spirits, but not in our hearts? Well, the first thing that we come to in this passage is very interesting, because after he says, one of you will betray me, you know who else is troubled? Peter. And so he looks over at John, that's the one that's sitting next to Jesus, and he motions to him and says, ask. I want to know who. You know what Peter wants to know, I think? Because he wants to go beat on that guy. He wants to go say, you're going to betray, I want to ferret out this Benedict Arnold. I want to ferret out this traitor. I want to find out who it is and give it what's due. So John leans over and he says, Lord, who is it? And I don't think Jesus says it out loud. It's the one that I'm going to give this little bit of bread that's dipped in the wine to. He doesn't say, he says it quietly to John. That's why nobody else knows. And maybe Peter later on asked John. I don't know. And so that's why they're surprised when Jesus says, go do what you're going to do it quickly. Because none of them knew that Judas was the one that was going to betray Jesus Christ. So they're all like saying, who? What does Jesus mean? He always talks so cryptically. We don't understand. And maybe at that moment, just like all of us, maybe some of them, they were having some doubts about who Jesus was. Maybe they're having some doubts about following him. There was a lot of external pressure because the Jewish leaders were now against their little tribe. And so maybe some of the disciples had some doubts, seeds of doubt in their heart. And they're like, does he see what I'm thinking? Does he know what's in my heart? All of you, I'm sure, have had this experience, especially younger kids. You're probably still in that place. But when your parents say something that they shouldn't know about, and when they ask you either jokingly or directly, and you kind of have this like funny laughter going, no, that's not true, you know? And you're kind of denying it, but in the back of your mind, you know that that's true, right? I know, because we get out on technicalities. I know this happens, and I'm not going to, call out my own kids, but I remember when I was a kid, when your parents would ask you, did you finish all your homework? Right? And technically, you finish all your homework that's due tomorrow, but not that's, due later on, or what your parents are meaning, or did you really do it all, as best you could, or, they would ask you certain kinds of things, and, where are you going? Well, ultimately you're going to this party, but you're going to your friend's house first. I'm going to my friend's house. You know what I'm saying? We have all these technicalities and these guilt. And so maybe they're going through that. But what I learned from this, when I look at this little passage, is this. Do we make decisions or we feel guilty in the back of our hearts, or we end up maybe betraying Jesus or doing things that we know that he would rather us not do? And we should be troubled in our spirits over things like that in our lives. And we should also be troubled for other people who are doing that when we see that blatantly being done. But let me tell you, on the flip side of that, we should take heart, because if you truly have received his grace, even when we betray his trust, even when we don't do what we know to be right, he'll never let us go. He'll never abandon us. Even when we're not fully loyal to our Lord, he will never abandon or betray us. I remember, I don't know, maybe probably about more like 15, 20 years ago, and I saw this. And I don't see it anymore, so I guess parents don't do it anymore. But some of you who are older would remember this, maybe some of the other ones too. But for these hyperactive little boys, like maybe like 2, 3, 4 years old, they used to have these harnesses with these like leashes. Have you ever seen that on a kid? I don't see it anymore. I think that, the people are going to, accused of child abuse, but it was basically like a dog leash, where it had a little string and you had a little cord thing, and then the kid would just go, and then, they could run around, the parent would just sit there going, like flying a kite or something, but, and I had that with my dog, and there's a leash, it goes out 30, 40 feet, and you just push the button and it just goes out and goes crazy, and it's free, it thinks it's free, and a little 2-year-old will probably think it's free, and it's running around, but it's still connected to the parent. You guys know what I'm talking about? And if the parent's actually really good, they can kind of move just enough so that the leash never kind of gets to its extent so the kid doesn't get jerked back. So it feels that it's free, but the parent feels at least at peace because it's still connected. The reason I give you that little analogy, that little picture in your mind, is because a lot of us, if you're Christ's, it may feel like sometimes God is not with you. that he's abandoned you. That you can do whatever you want. And as a Christian, you do have that freedom. But your heart is going to be troubled when you're not doing what God wants. But what I want to tell you for you to really understand is that you're never fully disconnected by God. God has this invisible, infinitely light connection with you that cannot be broken. If you've accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And that's the beauty of it. And eventually you'll feel it because you'll be drawn back towards Him. Even if you stray. Even if you wander. The problem with Judas is that it says, according to John, I don't think John saw Satan going into Judas's heart. What he's saying is, at that point, because Judas never came back to God, at that point he made the decision. And he was never connected to God. I can't tell you whether you're connected to God. I can't see it. I can't know it. But I'm telling you, if you are connected to God, if you have received His salvation, you'll be troubled in your spirit when you stray, even because we all stray. But there will be a glimmer of hope, and your heart will have peace as you head back towards Him, because you know you'll be accepted. Judas could have turned back to God, but he doesn't. Instead, what does he do? He takes his own life. He has remorse, he has regret, he has guilt, but the way that he deals with it is not by coming back to God and saying, God, I messed up. Would you receive me? Instead, he tries to pay for it on his own and takes his own life. The second thing that I want you to do, and I want you to have trouble in your heart over, is this. Is in loving other people. We talked about this a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to go too much on it, but when Jesus afterwards, after Judas goes out and he has 11 left, he says this commandment. Notice he doesn't give this commandment to Judas Iscariot. He only gives it to the disciples. And he says, if you are my follower, you need to love as I have loved you. You need to love one another as I have loved you, which means sacrificial. And so I don't want to go again and again on this, but here's what I want to tell you about this. The trouble in your heart should come when you know you aren't loving people sacrificially. It's easy to love people when they're loving you back. There's some people that are easy to love because they receive it and they're thankful for it, and there's this reciprocation. But to intentionally and continually love people who are difficult, that are in your life, that's what should constantly trouble you in your spirit, saying, God, I need to love this person. That is a good sign. That is not a bad sign. Do you guys understand what I'm getting at? The desire to love sacrificially and the knowledge that we fall short in it, but the desire to still do so. That kind of troubling in your spirit is a good thing. It's a sign that the Spirit of God dwells in you and that you're connected to God. You see, a lot of people, they want to write people off. This person, they don't appreciate it. No more friendship. No more relationship. No more marriage. No more child. No more parent. No matter anything. We want to cut off relations. We need to learn to love sacrificially like Jesus. And even when we aren't, which is most of the time, and which is all of us, we take heart in knowing that Jesus still loves me. And that all He desires for me is to try to love as He loved. Day in and day out. One of the things that I know from my own personal experience is this. When people are nearing the end of their life, and they know it. As a pastor, I've been in the hospitals, and people are in their last day, week, and then people in their last months. I've seen it up close. People never regret not having worked more, not having gotten a higher position or studied more. They don't regret making more money. They don't regret those things. What they regret at the tail end of their lives is not making the most of every opportunity to love on the people God put in their lives. And so almost always they want to just tell people how much they love them. Sometimes they write notes. Sometimes they record their voices. Sometimes they make letters for their kids or for their spouses in a remembrance afterwards. And see, when we think about that, we realize we have an undetermined amount of time. Why wait till the end? Why not do it now? Every opportunity today, a lot of us, we have this conviction, I should tell my mom I love her, or I should tell my dad I love her, or I should tell my wife or my husband. I know it's awkward because we're maybe not in the habit of doing it. You can do it through a note. You can do it through an action. You can do it through a little gift. You can do it whatever their love language is. You can do it, some way, somehow, but make the most of that. But then also there's those people in your life that are not being loved by anybody, but you see them and maybe you have a conviction. Maybe you're troubled in your heart about that person because you know they're not being loved. And someone needs to show them the love of God. And you're afraid that it's supposed to be you. It doesn't require a lot. This cult requires small acts and gestures. And I want to encourage you on that. And you should take heart because God never stops loving you. And that's why we can love others. The final thing that I want to point out to you is this. Peter has this discussion, and maybe he was going to go ask Jesus originally, who's going to betray you? But now he gets taken by another question that, Lord, where are you going to go? What do you mean where you're going we can't come? So I'm going to follow you to the very end. And then Jesus says something really harsh sounding. He says, before the sun comes up, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. How would you like somebody to say that to you? So what's going on? What's the difference between betrayal of Judas and this kind of betrayal of Peter? The way I want to phrase it is this. We will all have doubts in our life. Doubts about God, doubts about our faith, doubts about doctrine, doubts about certain truths. We're going to have doubts in all these different ways. And at that time, because we have this doubt, we may not stand up for God. We may end up, in a sense, inadvertently or, directly denying God, denying who He is, or denying the truth because we're still struggling with the truth of it. We might have doubts. And Jesus says, Peter, you're going to end up denying me because you're going to see me getting all, taken in prison and all this stuff, and you're going to wait, is He the Messiah? Isn't He the Messiah? And then at that moment, things are going to come out of your mouth. No, I don't know Him. I don't know Him. I don't know what you're talking about. He's going to literally lie to save His own skin because He has doubts. And there's going to be times when you're in a pressure situation where you say, I'm a Christian, or I'm a follower of God, or I believe this, but at that moment, crucial moment, because of the pressure, because of the peer pressure, because of the situation, because of the environment, you're going to either be quiet or just say, oh yeah, and go along with the flow. We should have turmoil, trouble in our spirit over the doubts that we have. But we should have heart and take heart that even if we struggle with doctrine, the God we believe in doesn't change. I always tell people this. Christianity is not belief in religion. Christianity is not belief in a set of doctrines. Christianity is not belonging to a church. Christianity is not a bunch of things that you do, a prescription for your life. Christianity is this. It is believing in God and believing in Jesus. That's what 14:1 says. Let your hearts not be troubled. Believe in God, believe in me. It's faith in a person, in a being. It's faith in God. And here's the difference that I want to tell you. I can struggle with doctrinal truth. I can struggle with certain ideas, and we can have a debate, and we can argue it. But the thing is ultimately those things may never be completely settled, and we may continually struggle with it. That's okay. But what you have to do is you have to say, God, from what I know, I am going to put my faith in you. And then now I'm going to have to struggle with all these doctrinal truths and obedience and everything else. Christianity is faith in a person. It's not faith in the Bible. It's not faith in the church or doctrines. Those things point to God. The Bible is the Word of God to reveal God, but it is not God. We're not going to be reading the Bible in heaven. I'm telling you. Okay? You're not going to be reading the Bible in heaven. Why would you read the Bible in heaven when Jesus is right in front of you? Right? Why would you look at a photo of your fiance or your boyfriend or girlfriend when they're right across the table? Because the photo makes them look better than they are in person? I don't know. Why would you do that? No. The person is infinitely better. I hope. I don't know. I guess with all the Photoshop stuff now. But God is infinitely better. The Bible is amazing. But I won't need it when I'm in heaven. When I'm in the presence of God. My faith is in the person of Christ. And so here's the thing. Even when you doubt, even when you struggle, and maybe you see other people doubting and struggle, you need to go alongside them and you need to perk up. But the thing that you should take heart in is that even when you doubt and struggle through things, he will always receive you back. He will always bring you back. You know what he says to Peter later on after he denies him and after he restores him? He said, Peter, I want you to be a shepherd. I want you to serve my people. I want you to feed my sheep. Literally what he's saying is, I'm putting you in a place of ministry to serve others. I want you to have a leadership role. You do not make yourself unfit for serving and being a part of God's team. He still wants you on the first string. He still wants you to go out and do things, even if you struggle with doubt, even if you go astray, even if you deny. The ultimate foundation of all that I'm trying to say to you is this. Being troubled in your spirit, having doubt, struggling, letting go of God's hand, not being as loving as you ought to be. All these things are turned upside down and right-sided up and the right way when you realize that I am a child of God and that will never change. And as a result, you continually struggle and maybe have trouble in your spirit, but you continually work through these things and you ultimately have peace that you will come out on top because you know whom you believe in and the fact that he will not abandon you. And this is what Jesus says, even though I'm going away and you cannot follow me, even though you can't go with me now, you will eventually come to where I am. And so I guarantee I'll never let you go. I'll never forsake you. I will always be connected to you. I'll never give up on you. So now have courage to love, to overcome your doubts, to overcome your betrayals, to forgive, to live. And as a result, these 11 men all undergo martyrdom. They give their lives for the gospel because they begin to understand later on. And they're saying, no trouble in my circumstances in my life can overcome me. But I will be continually driven by a heart, by troubling in my spirit for the people that do not know God, that still are struggling. So if we keep these things in mind, you'll understand how to have righteous stress, righteous anxiety, and get rid of all the unnecessary turmoil and stress in your life. I want to encourage you. May we do this together. May we do this. May we encourage one another.